In this episode of American Greed. By the time Elizabeth Holmes stands trial in the late summer of 2021, she is a walking Rorschach test. Young women dress up like her outside the courthouse and applaud the quote-unquote girl boss.
The whole maze, the Elizabeth Girls fandom, is alive and thriving, and they're all over social media. Their reasoning is, well, male villains have become icons. Look at The Wolf of Wall Street and Jordan Belfort. So why can't Elizabeth Holmes become a female icon?
Others see the Steve Jobs wannabe, accused of 11 counts of fraud against investors and patients, as the symbol of everything wrong with Silicon Valley. The hubris, greed, and duplicity. But when she takes the stand in her own defense, there's another persona. Victim. She points a finger in the direction of her former second-in-command and secret boyfriend, Ramesh Sunny Balwani. Holmes says Balwani was a menacing presence at Theranos, who called the shots and cast a shadow over her life. Will the jury buy her story?
We have not seen an Elizabeth Holmes like this that breaks down, that cries, that is emotional. But at the end of the day, these abuse allegations really have nothing to do with what she's being charged with.
I grew up in a family that was very focused on the belief that we're all here for a reason and we're here to try to make this world a better place.
Holmes grows up a child of privilege in Washington, D.C. Her mother is a congressional staffer, and her father is a former Enron executive. Though they're well off, the Holmes family seems obsessed with what they don't have, according to one-time neighbor and former family friend, Joseph Hughes.
These kids are raised with the idea that, even though we live in what most people would think of as a very nice upper middle class way, it's not good enough, because it's not what the Fleischmans had.
Elizabeth's parents, he says, like to remind people that the Holmes bloodline is descended from the famed Fleischmann yeast family.
And we're not just supposed to be in a home most Americans would think is luxurious. We're supposed to be in an estate. We're better than this.
At 9 years old, little Elizabeth proclaims to her parents that she wants to be a billionaire.
She certainly had encouragement from them to at least start in this direction. And there's no doubt in my mind that for Elizabeth, the notion of becoming this family champion and restoring them to grandeur is part of who Elizabeth is.
And she's got no time to waste. Right after high school graduation, the overachiever jets off to Beijing to study Mandarin as part of a Stanford University summer program. Amid all the other 18-year-old strivers, one person in the program sticks out. He's a 37-year-old man named Ramesh Sunny Balwani. He's a software engineer, a seasoned veteran of Silicon Valley startups, and is already worth $40 million. Yet he and the soon-to-be freshman click.
I was studying at a program in Beijing University in China, and he was there.
She was very famous in the Stanford Chinese program because the entire department knew about her Chinese, her skills, and so that's how when I first met her, I'm like, oh, you must be the Elizabeth Holmes.
Elizabeth Holmes arrives at Stanford University in 2002 with an ambition so big, it's almost childlike. She wants to become the Thomas Edison of biomedical engineering. She's recommended to physician, inventor, and Stanford professor of medicine, Phyllis Gardner.
She came to me twice. I always try to help students. I will do anything I can.
Dr. Gardner listens patiently to Holmes's idea, a wearable device that would simultaneously diagnose and treat disease.
She wanted to make a skin patch, and she wanted to sample the blood to test for an infectious disease. And then she wanted to deliver antibiotics through the patch. Antibiotics are they're low potency. And a patch, you can't get things through the skin easily. And so how are you going to do this?
Gardner believes Holmes's idea would require a quantum leap in science, but according to her, Holmes doesn't want to hear it.
I just couldn't help her. She didn't want help. She thought she knew the world of microfluidics and engineering, but she was just 19 and had a class or two.
So let me tell you a little bit about the class.
Undeterred, Holmes pursues a more receptive mentor, Stanford engineering professor Channing Robertson. Years later, New Yorker journalist Ken Auletta will interview both Holmes and Robertson.
In describing Elizabeth Holmes, he said, how often in your life do you get to meet a Beethoven, someone who is a genius? And he described her as a genius. He left his tenured position to join her, became a member of her board, and was a devout believer in her.
I have to tell you that this is going to be a special year because this is the last time I'm teaching the class.
Elizabeth Holmes has charmed her first champion. It seems Holmes has all she needs from Stanford. At age 19, she drops out to start her fledgling company, which in 2003 she dubs Theranos, a combination of therapy and diagnosis. And after Channing Robertson, Holmes gets her first financial pat on the back in 2004. That's when Tim Draper, a well-known Silicon Valley venture capitalist, invests $500,000 in the fledgling company.
And she said, I'm going to transform healthcare as we know it.
Around this time, Holmes abandons the wearable idea and conjures a more audacious vision, one steeped in a personal origin story she will recount years later when she's famous.
Having a needle in your arm is something that has kept people from taking care of themselves, right?
Absolutely, myself included. I'm absolutely terrified of it.
Holmes's lifelong fear of needles, she says, makes her fixate on a device that could perform hundreds of blood tests from a finger prick. Holmes calls her prototype the Edison, with a nod to the great inventor.
The idea of Theranos is a wonderful idea. We're going to make medicine cheaper for people. We're going to make it more convenient. It would be wonderfully disruptive, which is one of the things that Silicon Valley prides itself on.
And the investor class is all in. By 2006, she's raised more than $40 million in venture capital, including almost $6 million from media magnate Rupert Murdoch. The cash is designed to give Theranos engineers a long runway to perfect the Edison and someday bring it to market. But there's one big problem, according to journalist John Carreyrou. The idea is more science fiction than science.
When I started looking into Theranos, I learned early on by talking to laboratory scientists at universities, and the consensus among these scientists that I'd spoken to was that it wasn't possible. And it wasn't possible because that size of a sample isn't enough to do all those tests. And the quality of the sample that you get from a finger is just not as pure. It's polluted by tissue and cells that interfere.
The pie-in-the-sky idea becomes an albatross in the lab, and Theranos blows through its initial investments. By 2009, it's broke, with little to show for it.
Were you and Sunny Balwani ever engaged in a romantic relationship?
Yes.
Unbeknownst to investors, Sunny Balwani has been advising Elizabeth Holmes and secretly dating her. It will become an 11-year romance, with shocking details revealed at Holmes's trial. Holmes says when her relationship with Sunny first blossomed, she was vulnerable because she had been sexually assaulted at Stanford. She testifies that after confiding in Sunny, he told her, "I was safe now that I met him." But it's not just emotional shelter Balwani offers. He's a financial haven, too.
Long story short, I ended up giving a $12 or $13 or $14 million personal loan. I guaranteed a loan to the company.
The loan comes at a critical time, when Theranos is on life support. And just a few months after cutting this check, Balwani assumes the #2 position at Theranos, Chief Operating Officer.
He became the guy managing things day to day, and he really became the heavy.
For 8 years, Theranos has been toiling in obscurity and failure. But Elizabeth Holmes has a positive label for it: stealth mode. Just like her heroes, Holmes believes that success will be found right around the corner, after one more experiment, one more iteration, one more try.